Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Erin O'Toole, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our telephone town hall tonight. We're also live on Facebook and on YouTube to take questions from you. Tonight, I'm talking with Winnipeggers about the path to recovery and how Canada's Conservatives will secure the future. It was great to be there just a few days ago with my wife Rebecca and our kids Molly and Jack, and I got to show them where I lived on Comet Street on the base at 17 Wing, where I got my wings as an air navigator way back in the day in 95 and in 96. It was great to be a Winnipegger for a year, 40 below, Portage of Maine, and it'll be great to be with you tonight to answer questions about our plan, Canada's recovery plan, and how we're going to get Canada back on its feet, dust ourselves off after the pandemic, and get our economy back on track. If you have a question for me about our recovery plan or our vision for a more united, prosperous Canada, hit *3 on your phone now, and you can ask me live. If you have a question and you're following on Facebook or YouTube, put a question in the comments, and we'll try and get to that as well. We're here to be accountable for you. This past year and a half have been difficult for families across the country. Some families have lost loved ones in COVID-19. Other families have been hit by lost jobs or reduced hours. And we're all facing the cost of living crisis. We're seeing prices skyrocket. Instead of focusing on the recovery, on fighting the Delta variant and fires in British Columbia and the terrible chaos in Afghanistan, Justin Trudeau has called an election. Like usual, he's putting his own interests ahead of the national interest. And after 6 years of treating Western Canada as an afterthought, in fact, putting Canada to the brink of a national unity crisis, Mr. Trudeau is using a snap fourth wave election to ask for a reward. He wants to be rewarded with a majority government. Yet last week he said he doesn't worry about monetary policy and inflation because he doesn't think it's having an impact on families. Well, I know that rising prices are affecting families in Winnipeg and Durham, where I'm an MP, and across the country. In fact, we're seeing prices of gas, of groceries, of clothing for the kids, it's back to school time, all going up. And Mr. Trudeau's massive deficits are leading to inflation, causing this price pressure, and ultimately putting our social programs at risk. And the NDP, the Green Party, they like spending your money just as fast and just as out of control as Mr. Trudeau. So while there's 4 parties on your ballot, there are only 2 choices: Canada's Conservatives or more of the same. If you have any question about that, hit *3, and you can talk about our recovery plan or anything on your mind in this election. We need to replace Mr. Trudeau and the NDP and the Greens, their agenda of more borrowing, more debt, higher taxes, fewer opportunities for our children, and rising prices. Canada's Conservatives have a plan to stand up for working families from coast to coast to coast. And that's what we're putting forward to Canadians. It's why we launched this on the second day of the campaign. We want to get Canada's economy firing on all cylinders in Winnipeg and across Canada. Winnipeg's centre for aerospace jobs, agriculture, transportation. What we get right in Winnipeg, they have Western issues and the same manufacturing issues in Ontario. The issues facing Manitoba are an example of some of the challenges we're facing. So our plan to secure the future, 5 simple pillars: 1 million jobs created in 1 year. We're going to fire up the economy. Second, tough new anti-corruption laws for transparency and to restore faith in Ottawa. Mental health leadership through our Canada Mental Health Action Plan. Fourth, building the country's capacity up to be more ready to respond to future threats and pandemics and be more self-reliant. And fifth, we need to secure the economy by balancing the budget over the next decade so we don't bankrupt our children and our grandchildren. So this election really is about who do you trust to secure the economic future of your family. As I said earlier, we can't afford more of the same with Mr. Trudeau, the NDP, and the Greens. Only Canada's Conservatives have a plan to get this economy back on track in all sectors of the economy and in all regions of the country. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight. Once again, you can hit *3 or leave a comment on Facebook or YouTube to ask me a question live. And the person that's going to be hosting us is our friend Jennifer Jennekens, our candidate in a nearby riding of Ottawa West Nepean. Jennifer.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm Jennifer Jennekens, your Conservative candidate for Ottawa West Nepean. I support Erin O'Toole's vision for Canada, and I'm proud to be part of his team. Erin was raised in Bowmanville, Ontario, a community with middle-class values of hard work and helping your neighbor. He served our country in the Royal Canadian Air Force for 12 years. He had extensive experience in the private sector before being elected as a member of Parliament in 2012. Erin stands up for hard-working Canadians. He wants to work for you and to make sure that for generations to come, Canadians can grow up with world-class services, a healthy economy, and healthy finances. The telephone town hall is about to start, so please press *3 to ask Erin a question. Again, if you have a question for Erin O'Toole, press *3 now. So let's start with Dorothy, who has a question about pipelines. Go ahead, Dorothy, you're on the air with Erin O'Toole.
Are you planning to open up the pipelines?
Thanks, Dorothy.
Is the oil flowing again in this country? Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Dorothy. Yeah, this is probably one of the biggest areas where Mr. Trudeau's not only made our country less prosperous, he's actually divided the country in the process. 6 years ago, when I was in the cabinet in the Conservative government, we had 3 pipelines going through regulatory approvals to get Canadian resources to market, to get a better world price for a finite resource that helps all Canadians. And with Mr. Trudeau's ideological policies like Bill C-69 and his cancellation of Northern Gateway, we went from 3 to 0 until he had to buy the Trans Mountain pipeline with taxpayers' dollars, billions of dollars, to buy something that just a few years earlier the private sector was building without asking for a dime of government money. He backed himself into a corner because of misguided ideological policies that have also led to division in the country, because Ottawa has limited the ability for not just our country to benefit from better prices for our energy, but it's hit tens of thousands of families, and we've seen a flight of jobs and investment. So we will reverse that ideological approach, Dorothy. I've said in our first 100 days, we would eliminate the unfair provisions within Bill C-69 and have a fair, predictable regulatory process that allows projects, not just pipelines, any large project could not get approved under Mr. Trudeau's plan. That is not going to lead to jobs and investment because it's basically driving away any certainty. We can get our emissions down as a country, and that's important to me. We have a comprehensive climate change plan that is modeled, that will meet our Paris targets. It's in Canada's recovery plan. But we also have to get our products to market. We have to get better prices for them, because in the last few generations, there's been no one sector of our economy contribute more to our quality of life, to healthcare, to education, to jobs in all parts of the country than natural resources and energy. And I think we need to be world leaders on environmentally and socially responsible energy and resources while we get emissions down but get our products to market. So this is a priority, Dorothy. There's a detailed plan in Canada's recovery plan to get all sectors back on track, including energy.
All right, our next question is from Veibu, who is asking about how to attract the youth. Go ahead, Veibu.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. My name is Veibu. I'm a 19-year-old student from Winnipeg South. Let me tell you, being a conservative university student isn't very easy, but I'm really proud of being conservative. And I'm just wondering, the party's done a great job of trying to field some more groups that traditionally don't vote conservative, and I'm wondering what the plan is to get more youth to vote conservative, specifically university students.
Bebo, thank you very much for the support. In Winnipeg South, we have Melanie Mahar running, who is great. So you're committed. She could always use an extra door knocker, so please help out. She's a tremendous candidate. Also part of a military family, and as someone that served in the military in Winnipeg, I certainly love the fact that she's stepping up in such a big way for Winnipeg South. What we're offering young Canadians, and I'm reaching out, I want more Canadians to see a Conservative staring in the mirror at them on election day. That means more young people, more women, more new Canadians who may not have voted for us in the past. But what did you get with a vote for Justin Trudeau? You got a litany of broken promises on everything from the public finances of the country to clean drinking water on reserves to running an ethical government. Transparent by default is what Mr. Trudeau used to say. Now he's cover-up by default. Everyone has been let down by Justin Trudeau. My friend Jody Wilson-Raybould just retired from politics. Just one of several people disappointed with what Mr. Trudeau promises. The lofty rhetoric is not matched by his conduct or what he delivers as Prime Minister. So for young people, Mr. Trudeau has put $500 billion of debt on their shoulders. He's giving them less opportunity to find a good, meaningful job, not an Uber-type part-time job. We want to see long-term employment that you can build a career and build a family and build your opportunity in Canada. He's giving them less opportunity to own a home, harder time keeping up with the cost of living. So in Canada's recovery plan, we actually have a plan that will get young people established. I don't want to give up on any generation from having the opportunity to own a home, whether in Winnipeg, whether in Vancouver, Toronto, Halifax. And we've got a plan to help first-time home buyers, to give longer mortgage terms, to address some of the foreign ownership that's driving costs of housing up. And we have to get our public finances in order because the next generation is going to be saddled with Mr. Trudeau's overspending. And our economic plan, our job surge, our ability to get people working. I want people to be able to get out of school, handle their debts, get into a home, and have a rewarding career. That is all in Canada's recovery plan. So, Babo, I want more young people taking a look at the Conservative Party. We have a new leader. We have a new approach. We're reaching out. We have a plan. And I want your generation to succeed. I want to tackle the issues of inequality, of climate change, of reconciliation. And to help us do that, we need a strong economy that doesn't leave anyone behind. So show your friends, tell them to take another look at the Conservative Party of Canada.
All right, I have a question now for our audience. If Erin and the Conservative Party can count on your support, please press 1. If you're supporting another party, please press 2. If you're not sure yet, please press 3. And now we'll get back to Erin with more of your questions. So Jeanette has a question about GST.
Hi, Jeanette.
Hi. It was said that in December you would make it GST free. That will help the rich, but it certainly won't help anybody on fixed income.
Actually, it will, Jeanette.
No, it won't.
Anyone making a purchase will have a GST holiday in December. And what is interesting with this plan, it will help people actually in lower income levels even more because consumption, you eat up more of your available funds each month with some of the basics. And so people have been saying the cost of living is skyrocketing, is out of control. And if you have very little left at the end of the month, that 5% break you're going to be getting with that holiday actually on a per capita basis kind of helps people at the lower margins even more. And that's part of the reason we reduced the GST when the Conservatives were in government by 2 points. It's also the reason why we raised the basic personal exemption to allow people to keep more of their own money. It's why I'm doubling the Canada Worker benefit. We're going to give people at the lower income level the equivalent of $1 per hour raise because we want them to get ahead. And Jeanette, here's the great thing about our GST holiday in December. We're limiting it to in-person bricks and mortar stores. So this isn't for someone to go on and buy something cool that'll be sent here by FedEx from far away. This is going down to a place, a store by the Forks in Winnipeg, something downtown, something in the suburbs that you want to buy, maybe that gift for under the tree at Christmas. You'll get a little break. Is it tackling everything? No, but it is one way we're trying to show Canadians deserve a break. We're also pushing hard on the grocery chains to have a grocery code of conduct and take a strong line on price fixing and other things, because we want to see as much downward pressure on prices as possible, because, Jeanette, we do know people at the lower income levels, seniors on fixed income, are getting squeezed, and our GST holiday in December is just one example of Canada's recovery plan giving Canadians a break. The other parties are making it more expensive, are always driving up costs and taxes. We're going to leave a little bit more money in your wallet.
Okay, our next question is from Matt, who has a question on the aging Air Force and Navy. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Mr. O'Toole, as a retired Air Force maritime navigator like yourself, my question has to do with procurement, probably more than anything in the military. Obviously, the F-18 replacement and our Navy ships are in dire straits, and the last part really is the morale of the forces right now is taking a tremendous beating with what's happening with our senior leadership. Where do you see the military going, certainly in the next during your term?
Well, Matt, before you leave, were you on Aurora, as I take it, not on Sea Kings?
Sorry, yes, I was. I was the fixed-wing guy.
No, that's okay. Obviously, most of the folks that graduated with me at 17 Waiting in Winnipeg went Auroras. I think one went Hercs in my vintage, and I went Sea Kings. Maybe you could say I was the bravest at the time, considering Mr. Chrétien had canceled the replacement. It's a pattern, actually, with the Liberals. The decade of darkness that you and I would have served under, Matt, the cancellation of the Sea King. I was a cadet at RMC when Mr. Chrétien did that. Canada paid $500 million in contractual penalties and still had an old helicopter that needed replacing. Mr. Trudeau did the same thing with a misguided commitment with respect to the next generation fighter jet, replacing the CF-18. It's unfair. It costs Canadians more money. It puts our men and women at a capability disadvantage, or certainly even at risk. Right now we have, I think, the worst defense minister Canada has ever had. He's lied to Canadians on countless occasions, including making up a capability gap about our fighter jets when he went and bought used jets from Australia. My brother-in-law flew the F-18 in Australia and said, "Mate, you're getting jets that we used even more than yours because of East Timor and other operations." Mr. Trudeau's made us a bit of a laughing stock, and that's been the case with Liberals. Our used submarines, it's unfair to our men and women in uniform. And with the shipbuilding, first thing the Trudeau cabinet did was tried to kill the contract at the Davie shipyard to give us a temporary auxiliary tanker so that we could have a true blue water Navy. I will make sure our men and women have the equipment they need to do their job. I will also make sure that there's accountability for sexual misconduct and a culture of covering that up in the Canadian Armed Forces. This is important to me, not just as a veteran, but as a father. My daughter and I talk about my time in the military. I would never push her into one career or another, but I want her to be able to make a decision about serving her country without having to worry about going into a culture of intimidation, harassment, or misconduct. People that step up to serve their country, to put their country ahead of even their own well-being, should have respect and should have a culture of excellence and professionalism. That is what I will expect. And the fact that Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Sagen covered up allegations for 3 years is, I think, probably the biggest failure of leadership I've seen for our men and women in my lifetime. They deserve better, and with me as Prime Minister, they'll have a veteran as Prime Minister for the first time since Lester B. Pearson. That will help us get morale back on track.
Okay, our next question is from Donald, who's asking about youth involvement with the environment. Go ahead, Donald.
Hi, Donald.
Winnipeg. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Yeah, my question for you today was, just as many young Canadians are concerned with the environment and long-term sustainability for some of Canada's natural resources, I'm just curious today, how are you going to appeal to any of the young voters who, place the environment and climate control as one of their top priorities for election?
Thank you, Donald. This is an area I've said that the Conservatives, we didn't put forward a measured and detailed and strong enough platform on climate change in the last 2 elections. That has changed. We have a very detailed plan in Canada's Recovery Plan on how we can meet our Paris commitments, reduce emissions, but minimize the impact on jobs and investment. Mr. Trudeau's ever-rising carbon tax, he's already broken several promises about the level of his tax, is driving away jobs because there is no carbon tax in the United States. And so we're seeing investment and jobs flow just across the border, Ohio, Michigan. We can't allow that to happen. So what we've come up with is a program that does price carbon, and we're showing to provinces here is another option to get our emissions down and to tackle some really big areas of emissions by partnering with larger emitters, by major investments in carbon capture, utilization and storage, small modular reactors. We have a very detailed plan that I want to invite all young voters to look at. If you're worried about the housing crisis, jobs, debt on the shoulders, and want to make sure that there's a serious plan on the environment, the Conservative Party is your choice. If your only concern is climate change and you're not worried about jobs and the overall economy, there are 3 or 4 other parties to choose from. What I'm trying to do is say, let's get the country back on track. Let's make sure we get our emissions down. We owe it to future generations to tackle this seriously. But we will deliver, not just taxing and hoping that in the future they will meet emission targets. We've worked with consultants to come up with a plan that I think gets the balance right, takes climate change seriously, but also takes getting our economy back on track seriously as well.
Our next caller is Daryl, who's asking about bringing tech companies to Western Canada. Go ahead.
Hi, Daryl.
Hi. Yeah, I'm just wondering what is your plan to get tech companies and computer programming and future planning for our youngsters and our young people that are coming out of school that have these programming courses, but there's no jobs like here in Winnipeg or in in other provinces in the West here. We need to bring them out here. I want to know how you plan on incentivizing them to come out this way.
Well, that's a great question, Daryl. And I want you to know, when we created Canada's Recovery Plan, it came as a result of us not only having dozens, literally hundreds of meetings developing this policy, reaching out to employers, business organizations. We spoke to some in different parts of the country. So we met with Skip the Dishes and some of the tech startup hub in Winnipeg. And so we did similar things in Vancouver and elsewhere. And that came into our innovation plan that is in here in Canada's Recovery Plan. I'll refer you to page 28, Unleashing Innovation, where we're going to give an incentive for people to develop intellectual property here in Canada and develop jobs here based on really advantageous tax treatment if they continue to use their IP here. It's called the patent box approach. We're also going to use incentive to get private sector money, company money on the sidelines into the economy to help startup companies scale up, whether in Winnipeg, as Skip the Dishes did, or in places like Kitchener, Waterloo, Vancouver, Montreal. Even Fredericton has a great hub on cybersecurity, for example. We have to unleash this innovation, not by someone in Ottawa, like Mr. Trudeau or his minister, to say, this town or this city is going to be a cluster for this issue, the super cluster. We need to unleash that innovation where it is on the ground, where it is in our universities, where it is in already little hubs around the country. There is that in Winnipeg, and there's huge potential to further that. So we have a very set of ambitious targets. We're also going to incentivize some first mover advantage areas where, whether it's carbon capture, utilization and sequestration, whether it's small modular reactors, hydrogen, a range of areas where there's an environmental plus and there's already great Canadian intellectual property leadership. So Daryl, I think there's huge potential for Winnipeg to continue to build on what is already a bit of an innovation hub there by not government directing it, but by putting a playing field that encourages investment, encourages staying in Canada, not selling to or moving to the United States.
Okay, our next caller is Jeff, whose question is on universal basic income. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hello, Mr. O'Toole.
Hi, Jeff.
And thank you for your service with the Air Force. We appreciate that, all you guys do out there.
Thank you.
I would like to know your thoughts on universal basic income. It seems to be a topic of today. No one gets left behind, the military motto.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I don't support a universal basic income. And some of the folks that have suggested it doesn't leave anyone behind have actually been proven not to be correct. The most significant examination of UBI was recently done by the government in British Columbia, an NDP government supported by the Greens in a coalition at the beginning when they looked at this. And they actually found it would not address the inequalities to the extent that most people suggested, which is why a left of center government is not proceeding with it. Why Mr. Trudeau and his party have endorsed it is because they keep extending the CERB, and some people are suggesting you can just have the CERB forever, turn the CERB into a UBI. What we're already finding, Jeff, is a lot of employers. I just spoke to one on a previous call who has dozens of openings at his manufacturing facility and can't find employment. We hear this in hospitality, we hear this in tourism. When we were in Manitoba, we heard this as well because it's disrupting the labor market. What we need to do is get people to work and then to help people at the margins. So we're doubling the Canada Workers Benefit. We're also doubling the disability supplement as well. And we're trying to get people the help they need to get on their feet and to address some of the cost of living challenges. The real risk of a UBI is it will hollow out Canada's ability to have the very generous social safety net that we have. We need to have strong health care, and we're investing $60 billion in new money, 6% increase per year is our plan. Major investments in mental health and wellness. We have old age security, which is not a pension, it's funded by government revenues. If we suddenly have a major drop in people being employed in the private sector, we won't be able to fuel this important part of our social safety net. And no one came to Canada to go on a government program. People came to Canada for opportunity. And if we unleash that opportunity, if we get people back to work, as I said, in all sectors and all regions, then we can help folks in our community that are struggling, whether it with addiction, with dislocation, we can do retraining, with disabilities. I want us to have a generous and compassionate society, but we have to have a society of striving to be the best within your abilities, and then making sure we look after our neighbor. The UBI would slowly undermine that. And I understand there's some goodwill in people not wanting people to be left behind. But Jeff, BC looked at this and decided it was not the appropriate course of action. So in Canada's recovery plan, we have a number of measures directed at people that are at the lower margins. And we want to make sure the country has the fiscal capacity to have a strong and generous society. And that's what we will ensure with our Canada's recovery plan.
Our next caller is Michelle, who has a question on reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hi there. I'm really excited about the campaign that's happening so far, and my question is about non-Indigenous Canadian participation in shaping reconciliation. I know that there's the TRC report, and it seems that most party leaders are using that as sort of their sole document for reference for reconciliation, and I'm concerned that only Indigenous voices and Indigenous people's conversations with the government is going to address all of it, and that non-Indigenous Canadians are just sort of marginalized in the conversation.
Well, that's an interesting question, Michelle, and I'm glad you asked it, because I often say all Canadians have a role in reconciliation. And that's why Conservatives, we've supported a number of initiatives, even putting that commitment in the citizenship oath, for example. It's why I've asked Mr. Trudeau to move forward on calls to action 71, 76, dealing with missing children and grave sites at former residential schools. This is a heartbreaking period as the extent of these former sites are being explored and the tragic news is coming forward. But there are so many ways non-Indigenous folks can help, and can help the whole country on the path to reconciliation. And I think we all have a role. I often refer to my time in law, where I did a bit of work connecting the private sector community with Indigenous entrepreneurs. I did that through the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business, an amazing organization that has connected First Nation communities with opportunities for investment, that has helped build Indigenous supply chain networks in not just the resource sector, but in other parts of our country. When Mr. Trudeau, erodes our capacity in energy and natural resources, he's hurting Indigenous communities the most per capita. Suncor, as an example, has Indigenous supply chain requirements, and they spend about $900 million a year through Indigenous-led supply chain businesses. That's great innovation, and likely come up with by people that were non-Indigenous looking at ways to partner. I've spoken to the Indigenous Friendship Centers across the country helping urban Indigenous populations. They will often have some people within their volunteer networks or even on staff who are non-Indigenous. I think we all have a role to play here, and it's time for concrete action, which is why I've said I want Indigenous governance to oversee some of our commitments here, because I really worry there is almost, as we've seen with Mr. Trudeau, he'll say, I'm moving on all 94 calls to action. I'm ending boil water advisories. I'm doing this, but then he has no plan to deliver. And I think that sets back reconciliation. So we need governance. We need all Canadians to play a role. And this will be a centerpiece of what we do. And Canada's recovery plan has several specific initiatives that I think will really ignite economic reconciliation, which I think can be a real boost for all parts of that journey.
Okay, we're going to get back to Erin in just a moment again, because I have a question for our callers. If Erin and the Conservative Party can count on your support, please press 1. If you're supporting another party, please press 2. If you're not sure yet, please press 3.
And if you're really not sure and you have a question, hit *3 or put a comment. And if you've been disappointed and voted Liberal in the past, let us know what disappointed you. I often say the ethical scandals and the lack of a commitment on things Mr. Trudeau promised in the past is is leading to a constant sense of being let down and disappointed. Let us know if you are, because we want to restore your trust and earn your vote.
Okay, so next we have Susan, who has a question on how you're going to pay off the debt in 10 years. Go ahead, Susan.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. O'Toole. Yeah, you said you were going to pay down the debt in 10 years, and you're going to create 1 million jobs. So my question is, are the 1 million jobs new jobs, or are they jobs that were lost during the pandemic? And are they going to help to pay down the debt, or are they going to have to be cut somewhere?
Thanks, Susan. I'm glad you're holding me to account on the plan, and I'm happy to talk about it. So when you say debt, it's deficit. So we have an operating deficit, and every year that turns into debt. So our debt is over $1 trillion now. I'm not eliminating the debt in 10 years. That would be a big task. But we have to stop adding to it. Mr. Trudeau has added to it every year. He put on close to $100 billion of debt before COVID, in good economic times when we had high employment. Mr. Trudeau said he would never run a deficit bigger than $10 billion. He's never had a deficit even close to $10 billion. In fact, the last one pre-COVID was in the $35 billion range. Irresponsible is the hallmark of Mr. Trudeau's financial record before COVID-19. And now we have an out-of-control deficit with no plan, just continuing to kick down the road the same programs that were put together in an urgent fashion at the beginning of the pandemic. That is not leadership. Leadership is making sure we adapt, get people back to work as they can, have the back of people that are completely displaced, as we saw in some highly affected sectors, put the support where it needs to go, and not where it's helping friends and insiders like with the We Charity scandal. So our commitment, Susan, is to eliminate the deficit in 10 years. We're not going faster than that because we don't want cuts. In fact, we're going to spend on healthcare, on mental health, on wellness, and in the short term, we want to reverse the reliance economy, relying on government, to relying on opportunity. And so we're going to kickstart with our job surge and some of our target job programs to get the country back to work in all sectors. We're going to encourage employers to hire people who've been unemployed for a longer period of time. We're going to give them a bigger job boost to hire those people, to give them the chance. And that's where our job commitment comes. Coming out of the pandemic, there's 300,000 to 400,000 people still not employed, particularly in highly impacted sectors. And then there's several 100,000 more that are part-time or underemployed. And then Mr. Trudeau's ideological approach against energy, against resources, that has hundreds of thousands of people displaced from our economy. So I've said, and I say this all the time, I want to see an economic recovery in all parts of this country, including Winnipeg, and in all sectors of our economy. I don't think it's right for Mr. Trudeau, the NDP, and the other parties to pick or choose what parts of the economy should come back, build back better, according to what Mr. Trudeau thinks. I think it's better if someone has a job and an opportunity. And whether that job is in retail, in service, in hospitality, working hard, I respect that and honor that, and we will fight for those opportunities for people to provide for their family and their community. That will get people back to work. That will also allow us to tackle the overspending of Mr. Trudeau. So our 10-year plan is based on coming to balance in a way that is fair, that is equitable, and focuses on some of the short-term challenges coming out of a very difficult year and a half for our country.
Our next caller is Dawn, who has a question about health care. Go ahead, Dawn.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. O'Toole. Appreciate your willingness to answer questions this evening. There has been an accusation by our Prime Minister. You favor a two-tier health care system. would you be very clear in sharing with us this evening exactly what you believe regarding a two-tier system and whether you would be in favor of that and whether you would seek to implement such a healthcare system in Canada if you were elected?
I'm glad you asked this question, Don, because there's already been some misleading allegations and mischief being played by the Liberals in a campaign we shouldn't even be in. Let me be perfectly clear. I 100% support our public and universal system. Full stop. Mr. Trudeau knows that, which is why Mr. Trudeau and Ms. Freeland misled people with a tweet and were caught. The first time that a global social media company has highlighted misleading conduct in a campaign in Canada is this Liberal campaign. It's completely disappointing, and it's a sign of a government that is run out of gas, has no ethics and no plan. I'm happy to put my commitment to Canadians alongside Mr. Trudeau's any day. He called this election and has no plan. I've been leader a year, literally today, and have a plan called Canada's Recovery Plan, Don. In this plan, we're investing another $60 billion of new funds into our public universal healthcare system to get it back on its feet. In addition, there's additional funds for addiction that I announced in British Columbia at a recovery home yesterday, and for Indigenous health and mental health more broadly. That is why talking about getting our country back on track, not just people working and the economy strong, I want families well and strong. So the fact that I launched our plan with detail on day 2 and on day 8, Mr. Trudeau's lying to people about my plan and about my own record shows we deserve better in our Prime Minister.
Our next caller is Jamie, who has a question about workers on boards policy. Go ahead, Jamie.
Hi, Jamie. Are you there, Jamie? Well, while you're teeing the next one up, I can tell you, I was hoping to get this question because this was my announcement today. I want working Canadians to know they can have a seat at the table in decisions that relate to their job, to their business, and the well-being of their family. So for federally regulated companies that are of a sufficient size, we're going to require worker representation on the boards of directors. So federally regulated, for folks that are wondering what that means, that's banks, that's telecommunication, that's rail, which of course in Transcona, a real rail hub, having lived in Winnipeg, I know that. I think that's showing working Canadians who I've reached out to since the very first speech I gave. I came from a town where my dad worked at GM. I want to make sure that workers know that they're going to have a seat at the table and they'll always have an open door in the decisions of a government I lead, because I want opportunity. Whether you're in a unionized workplace, whether you're a small business owner, I want to get this country moving again, and that's my commitment with respect to our announcement today on boards.
Okay, our next caller is Grace, who has a question about long-term care facilities. Go ahead, Grace.
Hello, Mr. O'Toole.
Hi, Grace.
Please have this opportunity to bring forth the issue of long-term care homes across Canada. They have been in a deplorable state, and I would like to know if federal government plans to do anything about it, especially in the area of physiotherapy.
Great question, Grace. And this has been an area where the pandemic showed serious weaknesses and serious gaps in our systems across the country. Each province has unique needs. And of course, in my own province of Ontario, when the first wave hit, we weren't ready. And long-term care is an area that we have to learn the lessons. And as a federal government, we will be there as a partner, which is why we have a commitment in Canada's Recovery Plan of increasing health transfers to the provinces by a minimum of 6% each year, and allowing the provinces to build up capacity in long-term care. They know the needs of their system, whether it's the capital in Winnipeg. They know it much better than the bureaucracy in Ottawa. So we want to partner here and not have an Ottawa knows best, but we do want to see an approach for long-term care and filling the gaps. On services, health services like physiotherapy and other things, those are decisions about the provincial system and what services may be covered at what amount. We want to make sure the provinces have a predictable and ever-increasing amount of federal transfer so that they can make the decisions and serve the needs of their population. And that's something we're guaranteeing in Canada's recovery plan. We're going above that, Grace, in a few areas related to mental health, to work with some nonprofits and some providers on the ground. We're going a little further on addiction. But really our focus on building long-term care capacity, we're earmarking some money specifically for that, but we really want the provinces to take the lead, and any way we can bring together the provinces to tackle this together, that's how we will act as a federal government.
So I have a question again for our callers. If Erin and the Conservative Party can count on your support, please press 1. If you're supporting another party, please press 2. If you're not sure yet, please press 3. So our next caller is Gurdeep, who would like to know a little bit more about minority governments.
Hi, Gurdeep.
Hey, how are you, my friend? How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Fantastic. I am so thrilled to see how this campaign is running along. You started off quietly in the background, methodically pushing the message, and as my good friend John Rays and Rod Bernouge know, that Melanie is going to be knocking over Mr. Dogood, taking back Winnipeg South. And in addition to all of this, all I want to know is that you can't go into it, but do you actually have a plan to put in a 1-2 punch near the end to make sure that we don't be a minority government, but we actually win a majority? Because if we believe and we keep dreaming and we keep pushing, we will get there. And I just want to know if you're actually got something in mind. Without, obviously can't share details, but are we kind of like in that kind of a role right now?
Well, thanks, Gurdeep. Look, listen, John Reyes is a really good friend, an MLA, and he sailed on a different ship in the Royal Canadian Navy than I did. I was on Seeking on board St. John's, and we have a lot of fun teasing each other about which is the best ship in the Navy. But I can tell you this, our 1-2 punch is Canada's recovery plan. Now, we put the punch out on day 2 of the election because I want Canadians to know that we have a plan for everyone to get the country moving. And I'm a new leader. I wanted to say, here's what I'm going to do. We did not whip this together on the back of a napkin, as Mr. Trudeau is doing right now, asking for people to give him some ideas, because after 6 years, he clearly has none. He's out of ideas and out of passion for the job, it seems. Our 1-2 punch is a plan to get people working in all sectors and in all regions. I think that's what people want. They don't want Mr. Trudeau, as he did today, to re-announce something he announced several years ago and didn't deliver on then, and what's going to change now. People are tired and cynical of politicians who make promises with no plan to get there. This is a detailed plan on jobs, on accountability, on mental health leadership, on building our capacity as a country, and getting our finances back in order in a way that's fair to get people working and help address some of the issues with the pandemic. I think it's exactly what we need. And Gurdeep, you know some people that know me. I make commitments to deliver on them. And that's what I've done in uniform, in the private sector, in my charitable work. I hope my kids say Dad always follows through on what he says, except when it comes to punishments, because I am very soft. But that's my record, and I'm putting it out there for Canadians to see, and I hope to earn their trust. That's going to be consistent from beginning to end in this campaign.
Our next caller is David, who has a question on foreign home purchases. Go ahead, David.
Mr. O'Toole, it's great to see the campaign unfold. I'm very encouraged, and it's great that you're taking some time to speak to Winnipeggers. the foreign purchase of homes, obviously right now in the last number of months, we've seen a very overheated real estate market right across the country, in virtually every corner. That is not always the case. Often, when our good neighbor Alberta booms, Manitoba sometimes suffers a drain of population, and our housing suffers. You made a commitment for a period of time in this program, but could it be very apparent that some areas were not holding up or became off? Is there flexibility there? Look at a region-by-region approach.
You know, that's a very interesting and important question, David, and I'm glad you looked at our housing policy, and it's been great to see some commentators seeing the Conservatives. We put together a very substantive and thoughtful set of policies to tackle the housing crisis. We're the only party that has done that. And on the ban on foreign non-resident purchases, if you're only using the Canadian real estate market to park some money for protection, you have no intention of coming here and starting a career or bringing your family here or living and paying taxes, for 2 years, we are going to stop that, because we have to take a serious look at how we can get the housing crisis under control. And we think a 2-year period can allow us then to reassess that. And what you're saying, David, is something that we did hear in our consultations and our work on this. Should this have been just something we did with respect to BC and Ontario and some places that were particularly impacted? We didn't think that was the way to do it. We think it should be a 2-year pause on this concept of parking money in Canada. In BC, there's also an inquiry underway on the fact that money laundering in some ways was also being a part of one of the pressures on the real estate market in the Lower Mainland. So we think for 2 years, it's a pause. It also lets us get our million homes in three-year commitment rolling with specific other policies, lets us make some changes to mortgage rules and terms, get the other aspects of our plan in place. And then after 2 years, we would work with the provinces to see, did this have any negative impact? It is an unusual and bold move, but this crisis needs action. A 1% surcharge on a transaction is basically a nuisance fee for people that have that much money that they're just stashing away. We're going to ban it for 2 years and reassess after that.
Okay, our next caller is Brian, who has a question on electric vehicles.
Hi, Brian.
Mr. O'Toole. Hello, Mr. O'Toole. In the summer that we've had in Manitoba, it's been very evident that climate change is kind of upon us. And I was wondering, did the Conservative Party have any kind of program in the future, anything like that, in regarding to electric vehicles, and maybe even for electrification of houses and stuff like that? And since we have such a big utility of Manitoba Hydro, which basically is, got three new power sources there that they've put online. Something that helped the province of Manitoba become more of a half province as opposed to being a have-not, which has too long.
Great question, Brian, and I agree. We're seeing the impacts of climate change now. We're seeing that with more frequent droughts and adverse weather events. We're seeing this in British Columbia with both the incredible heat wave and now the wave of fires, which is one of the reasons why I don't think we should be in an election that Mr. Trudeau called despite a crisis for thousands of families. So you've asked a very thoughtful question. I want to give you a thoughtful answer. I want you to go to page 78 in Canada's recovery plan. We have a very detailed plan on EVs, for example, or zero emission vehicles, that we're really looking at some of the work that both BC and Quebec has done. So we're creating a mandate with respect to 30% of light duty vehicles sold to be zero emissions by 2030. We have some commitments on infrastructure and some investments on the hydrogen economy, which could also be very effective here for getting emissions down. And anything that can help us get a lower carbon future, particularly for electricity generation, is something we have to take advantage of. In fact, Ontario paid the price when, I think it was Bob Rae, canceled the Kanawapa Dam that would have had transmission between Manitoba coming down through northern Ontario to give Ontario yet another source of zero emission clean electricity. You cancel a project like that in the short term, it's hard to turn it back on. And if the transmission had been built, we would have had transmission and power for the Ring of Fire. So really misguided decisions with respect to power and provincial interties will really hold us back. So we have a very, very ambitious policy that will help us meet our emission target, but also unlock some innovation. And electric vehicles, lower emission technologies is a big part of our program, and we're putting some money where our mouth is on this, Brian.
Thank you, Erin. I know the Conservative team is ready to deliver Canada's recovery plan and stand up for hardworking Canadians and their families. That's why I'm glad you're leading Canada's Conservatives in this election. We hope you found tonight's conversation useful. If Erin O'Toole and Canada's Conservatives can count on your vote, please press 1. If you're supporting another party, please press 2. If you're still unsure how you'll vote, please press 3. If you did not have a chance to ask your question, please stay on the line and leave a message for our staff. Your question is important, and we'd like the chance to respond to you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for hosting, and thank you to folks in Winnipeg for being on our call tonight. We've got great candidates running for us in Winnipeg that I'm really hoping you can support. In Charleswood, St. James, where I lived when I did my training at the base, Marty Morans. Winnipeg South, Melanie Mahar. St. Boniface, St. Vital, Shola Agbola. Elmwood, Transcona, Rajan Karan. And Raquel Dancho in Kildonan and St. Paul's. We have many of the numbers we called tonight are in those ridings. And Canada's recovery plan, I talked a lot about everything from our GST holiday to pipelines, to the environment, to Brian's question on electric vehicles. We have a plan to get our country back on its feet after COVID-19. It's been the worst health and economic crisis in our country's history, and Canadians deserve a plan. We're in a cynical election called by a Prime Minister with no plan. Canada's Conservatives have a plan to get people back to work in all sectors and in all regions, including in Winnipeg, including in Manitoba. With a plan and a great team, we can secure a future for your family. And that's why we're here and why we're being accountable to you. Check out our plan on our website. Follow us on social media. If you do have any other questions, please get in touch. We've got Canada's recovery plan to secure the future. Be well. Thanks for taking part tonight.